I call to order the November meeting of the Public Works Committee. In attendance, we have Vice Chair Barbara Burke virtually. To my right, I have Councilmember John Larson. To my left, Councilmember Annette Scipio. Before we get into either the consent or the general agenda, I would like to take a moment of personal privilege and introduce our new Sustainability Director, Ms. Shalene Miller. She comes forward to say hello. I'm going to read her lengthy bio. I usually try to keep these meetings short. This one may substantially alter that. Dr. Shalene Miller began serving as Sustainability Director a little over 2 weeks ago. She received her PhD in Urban and Regional Planning from Florida State University. She teaches in the Environmental and Sustainability Program at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. She has also previously acted as the Interim Director for the Natural Hazards Resilience Graduate Certificate at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and taught at 4 other universities. Dr. Miller's research has been in environmental planning at the intersection of building healthy communities, green infrastructure, and social justice. She has served on boards and commissions in every city that she has lived in for the past 15 years. Currently, her urban ecology and design class at UNCG is working on a tree canopy study of Greensboro that will be presented after the Thanksgiving holidays. Quite a resume. Thank you and welcome to the city. If you want to say a few words, we'd love to have you.
Good afternoon, Chairman McIntosh, council members, committee members. Thank you for having me. I welcome if anybody wants to come forward and meet with me, chat with me about what you want to see in the city, what you've been working on, but I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Please promise you'll limit your talks to half of what Councilmember Clark did today. It took about an hour and a half, I think. So, thank you and welcome aboard.
Thank you.
All right, do we have any items from the consent agenda that we need to pull and talk about?
C2.
C2. Councilmember Burke, anything? All right, if I could get a motion to approve the ballots, and I think we are voting by voice since we are not all here in person.
Yes. So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? That is unanimous. Okay, if we could have item C2, please.
Item C2, resolutions authorizing municipal agreements with the North Carolina Department of Transportation for the maintenance of traffic control signs, markings, signals, and computerized traffic signal system.
All right, can we get a staff report on this, please?
Good afternoon, Councilperson McIntosh and committee members. Bobby Kroon with the Winston-Salem Department of Transportation, Assistant Director. What you have before you for this item are the schedules A, B, C, and D, which are annual contracts and agreements with NCDOT to get our reimbursement for maintaining signs, pavement markings, the traffic signal system, and to do any preventative maintenance works on our traffic signal cabinets. Any questions I can
Particular
answer?
questions?
I did. I think we've been learning all kinds of wonderful things this week, and I think this is another one of those wonderful things that we don't always think about, who takes care of all of the traffic signs, signals, et cetera. My question was, what is everything reimbursed? We do it, and then we get reimbursed.
So in classic bureaucratic style, the answer is it depends. So many of the intersections, as with most municipalities in North Carolina, they're either classified as NCDOT maintained or City of Winston-Salem maintained. So for the work that we do for the NCDOT maintained intersections or DOT streets, we are reimbursed a pro rata percentage of those items. For instance, if we were to do work for a traffic signal item, that is based off the number of signals that are the cities versus the ones that are maintained by DOT. So we have that percentage, and we get reimbursed that percentage for any of the work we do at that particular location. For items that are a little more lump sum, like our traffic signs and traffic markings, those are more on a per unit basis. So that's determined within these agreements, and we get that percentage up front as a flat fee.
Was it, am I interpreting the CARF correct, that and just let me know, annually what we get reimbursed, is it around 500,000?
It depends for each agreement. Each agreement, the A, B, C, and D are separate ones, and we have a separate amount for each of those agreements. So, and I'll highlight, if you read the CAR for instance, Schedule C, that one actually went down from about $511,000 down to $400,000. And the reason behind that is over the last several years, the amount that we've been asking to get reimbursed has declined, and we've never really crossed that $400,000 reimbursement. So rather than DOT continuing to set aside and budget for that money, they've lowered that amount in conjunction with us.
So I didn't see in the resolution amounts for Schedule A, B, C, and D. I think it's just for C and D, but not A and B.
That's right. And so the nuance there is that C and D, there are set amounts that DOT sets aside based off that type of work. A and B are for the, respectively, the signs and the markings, and those where you get those flat rates. And it really depends on how much work we get assigned by them or from our citizens.
And do we physically do that with our internal staff, or do we subcontract that work?
The majority of it right now, we continue to do in-house. There are some items, for instance, loops, traffic signal loops, that we've had to contract out recently just because of staffing shortages, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Councilmember Larson.
I think one of the confusing things about this city is who actually maintains and who owns the streets. And we continually run into these questions of private streets versus public streets versus city streets. Is there an easy way, is there a quick way to find out whether a street is maintained by the state or by the, is that online somewhere that people can go find that out pretty quick?
Yes, sir. Actually, there is. NCDOT maintains the POW bill maps throughout North Carolina for all municipalities. And for those who may be watching, the POW bill map is when DOT reimburses municipalities for work to maintain those streets, whether it be potholes or resurfacing or something like that. So DOT, on their main website, they have a repository of the POW bill maps for each city. And once you click on those maps, you can determine, and it'll show you which streets are maintained by DOT versus which ones are maintained by the city locally, and in a lot of cases, which ones are private also, that are on their records.
Now, when you say maintain, does that include paving?
Yes, sir.
We're dealing with here is a lot of signage and striping and maintenance, general light maintenance, what I call light maintenance. A total repaving is still at the discretion of the state DOT.
For their streets, that is correct, yes, sir.
And do we have any influence on that at all?
We have made requests before, and I can speak historically because I'm almost about to click off my third month here, so I'm not sure about local politics quite on that level, but historically I know that we have been in close conjunction with DOT. Some divisions take that into consideration more than others. I've met Mr. Ivy, who's our division engineer here, and he seems like a great resource. So I think we have that close relationship, and I may refer that question also to engineering, but I believe we do have the ability to at least request it.
And who decides whether a street is maintained by the state or maintained by the city? I know some streets have been turned back over to the city from DOT. How is that decided?
It's really an agreement, and that can come in several forms. Both historically, NCDOT is going to maintain any of the interstates, arterials, major corridors in a municipality. Sometimes cities have requested to maintain some of those streets because they wanted to do something that was outside the purview of DOT or what they wanted to maintain, whether it be a reduction in lanes or something like that. Other streets will come on the city system when new developments come on board, and that right-of-way and those streets get dedicated to the city as part of the development process.
Right, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Very informative.
I think we work really hard to maintain our relationship with NCDOT. We work together pretty well, and we try to keep it that way. Several of us attended a meeting the other day where state officials talked about the changes that are upcoming in funding. With higher fuel efficiencies for cars and with electric vehicles, the amount of gasoline tax that's collected is plummeting and will continue to do so. So there are multiple different strategies about how to raise the money to maintain the quality of our roads, which in North Carolina is very good. North Carolina ranks very highly. So that'll be somewhat of a political battle, I think, on fronts, but hopefully they'll continue to spend the money. This past time, they came out of the general fund in order to do it, so that's good. Okay, if nothing else, could I get a vote to approve?
Move for approval.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you very much. Okay, that moves us to the general agenda. And we have all information items, so there'll be no voting required. We can have G1, please.
Item G1, information on the City of Winston-Salem parking program.
Good afternoon, Chair.
Good afternoon.
Members of the committee and council.
You can tell the viewers at home who you are.
Reed Hutchins, Transportation Operations Manager
Thank
for
you,
the
sir.
City of Winston DOT. Today, I want to take a couple minutes to bring up to speed on the parking program modernization effort that City of Winston-Salem DOT is undertaking. So we'll jump right in. All right, so as a quick overview here, we'll talk about the city-maintained facilities real fast. We have 2 parking decks, 6 Cherry Trade and 4th and Church deck. We have a couple of surface lot and shared facilities such as the City Hall North, right out here, City Hall South in the parking deck, the Forsyth County Municipal Lot, and the Chestnut Street surface lot. In total, we have about 2,500 parking spaces, and mainly just in our downtown. We have maybe another 150 outside of downtown around Atrium Baptist Hospital, and a couple other little neighborhoods in West End areas such as. Enforcement, we have 2 enforcement officers that work Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And like I said, we do mainly just enforce in the downtown areas and a couple little pockets outside. All right, so moving right along, as you probably are aware and see our equipment all around the city, we have a combination of off-street parking and on-street parking. Our off-street options include gate arms and ticket booths with a parking attendant at them. And the infrastructure is rather old. We're talking 2020 when some of it was installed. If you look on some of the ticket booths, it says like October of 99 or January of 2000. So we're pushing 23, 24 years. And on street, you'll see around City Hall, Forsyth County Municipal Building, and the courthouses, we have parking meters and pay stations. That infrastructure is over 10 to 12. The meters have been in there for some, I can estimate about 25 plus years. So we're talking that this technology is out of date. And that's what we're here to talk about right now. So some other options and kind of what we're shooting towards in the city of Winston-Salem are already existing alongside us. In front of you, the pictures that you see, you have some locations such as the First Presbyterian Church, some other parking decks in the city that offer this new technology where you can scan a QR code and pay by phone, or call a number, or grab a new ticket and not come in contact with a human, or really have to use a card or cash. So the goals of the modernization and why we're here is to partner. We've done a lot of research as a department, and we've met with some stakeholders, downtown partnership groups such as those, and we've really found that it's beneficial to partner with a vendor. Vendors, you'll go to any municipality, Greensboro, Raleigh, Charlotte, Asheville, Wilmington, even High Point to a smaller degree. They all partner with these third-party companies. You'll see the ones already in Winston. If we go back, the one at the bottom there is a third-party company that partnered with that lot. We're talking a little bit more wide scale here than just one lot. We're talking about really our whole parking operation here. We find that it's going to be beneficial because they can offer this updated equipment, new pay options such as the QR code, a text option, pay by a telephone by talking to one of their customer service representatives. They'll provide new enforcement software, and this is the big one here, the ticket appeal software. Our current enforcement officers spend about an hour of each workday dealing with appeals from citizens. If we could kind of outsource that program, that would be a huge benefit. It would get our enforcement officers on the street more and allow them to write more tickets. We're looking at a vendor to operate both the on-street and off-street options. The off-street, which are the parking decks and surface lots, those are kind of more simple. That's a combination of gate arms or kiosks or cameras that will take a picture of the license plate, things like that. The on-street's where it gets a little bit more interesting. It'll be a combination of new signs that whenever we choose the vendor, that will either have a QR code or that text number or the call number or something along those lines. Another goal here is to reduce the subsidy. For years and years in Winston-Salem, our rates have sat around 25 cents per hour or 25 cents per 2 hours, some combination. If you look at other municipalities comparable to our size, they're all in the $1 to $1.50 range. And so it's important that we kind of remain competitive with these other municipalities and not fall too far behind, kind of like where we are right this second. Going a little bit further with our rates, we have the capability with these vendors to push out new rates. Say the city has a big convention at the Benton Convention Center. If we want to charge more or less, make it free parking, this offers us the ability to do such things. I mentioned before the enforcement software. This is another big piece for our staff internally. Our current software is a telephone that has an app on it, and then they have a printer that it works a lot of the times, but it's kind of outdated at this time. These new companies, these vendors really offer that new software that's all cloud-based or internet-based, and really just kind of will springboard us into 2023, 2024, and beyond. And again, another point here is we have the ability, once we kind of get this program up and running, to expand to maybe outside of 8 to 5. If we want to go 8 to 10 or 8 to midnight or something along those lines. Once we get a little further in, that's what we're looking to possibly do. Add some more enforcement, bring in some more revenues for the city. All right, so some advantages. I think I've touched on a couple of these. So this will really offer the ability to pay a lot faster for the citizens. We receive a lot of complaints about the pay stations, how they don't accept the card, or the bill acceptor might not be working. It's no secret that most people nowadays have a smartphone. They have that technology in their pocket, something that has internet access on it, something that they can scan or text and pay within 5 minutes, or pay while they park or on their way to their destination. The customer will receive an alert once their time is expiring. They can then add more time, or of course they'll have to move or risk getting a violation at that point. This whole operation is scalable. I kind of envision in my head, like I mentioned, the off-street options are fairly easy to fix. The on-street might take a little bit more time to really include the whole scope of our enforcement area, but it's something that we're definitely open to. So what does this really cost the city? So the investment, I believe, and we'll achieve this through the RFP, will be limited on the city side of things. The way that this happens is the vendor will provide a lot of the equipment. The city might have to fund some of the equipment costs, but they will take a per transaction fee of, let's say if our parking rate is $1, they'll take 20 cents of each dollar kind of thing to reimburse themselves to make it worth their while for operating in our city. In return, we get the equipment, the software, and their appeal services, everything that we've kind of discussed up to this point. All right, so that was a lot of information in a short amount of time. So next steps here, we've begun working with some external stakeholders in the city, the partnership, the downtown business owners. We're not trying to rip the Band-Aid off per se to a certain degree, but we're trying to move forward and really kind of get our parking operations back into this current time. So Our office, we've prepared pretty close to a scope of work. We stand prepared to work with our purchasing department to advertise this and select a vendor sometime early springtime of next year, I would think. And then another thing I wanted to bring up as something in the future, I mentioned it earlier, how our fees were much lower than any municipality in the area. We will more than likely be coming back to this committee and the city council for a proposed rate hike that kind of matches those other municipality and makes it worth our while and worth the vendor's while once they take out that per transaction fee. So yeah, we're excited about the direction of our parking program, and I'll open it up for any questions.
Thank you, Reed. Good report. Questions from committee? Councilmember Scipio.
A few questions. One of the things that could attract people to be downtown is no cost for parking. But when people go out to other cities, they know that when they go there, there's always a parking fee. And some cities, particularly larger metros, there are significant costs to parking, even off-street or on-street. It's just very expensive. What would it take for us to have a non-subsidized parking program?
Councilmember Scipio, I think there's a couple other facets into that. I think are you talking about just basically having free on-street parking?
No, I'm just for what we do, providing parking. What would it take to break even? I know we're operating at a deficit, but I just wanted to know what it would take for us to break even.
Yeah, great question. So this program is meant to break even at the very least. The goals long-term are to not be in the red anymore with our parking program. I don't know the exact numbers, the exact number of years that we've been operating this way, but the goal in this is to really make us, I hate to use the word competitive against other municipalities, but catch us up. You know, it's unheard of. People love to come to downtown Winston because it costs 25 cents to park. That's unheard of anymore. Like you alluded to, in Charlotte, it probably costs you $10 to park. We aren't trying to get to that $10 range, but we're trying to just at least raise it to where the city is not losing and subsidizing that to that degree.
And I think we have to think as some things that we offer should be thought of as a business. It should be income generating. And I think we need to really look at what does it take to actually have revenue coming in from parking on street. And so I would like to just know more about, let's more discussion about that, because we have so many other needs in other places. We need to make sure we're spending our money correctly in everything we do. And so that one, we need to figure out how much is it costing us to provide any on-street parking? And then what does it take to actually generate a revenue?
Councilmember Scipio, you may remember during the budget season last year, I think this came up, I think Councilmember McIntosh and Councilmember Clark kind of said, why don't we just roll the parking fund into the general fund? There was some discussion about that, and Scott and myself have had some conversations about that. I think that bears some further discussion for exactly what you mentioned as we continue to move forward with this process. I think one of the things that Reed identified on his slides earlier was really that enforcement piece, our limited enforcement that we do now. We know we're leaving a lot of revenue on the table as it currently is with our limited enforcement ability. So that's a factor that's kind of added in that's offered to us, frankly, through going through a modern solution like this. So I think we're just now beginning the conversation on the parking modernization project. I think we have several more big picture discussions coming our way as we move through this. And that's something we'll certainly keep in mind.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councilmember Larson.
I don't know that we'll ever totally solve the parking problem, but I'm curious about a couple of things. the in-deck parking versus on-street parking and the enforcement of both of those. The ability to enforce, for example, in-deck parking is controlled, I guess, at the gate when they're trying to get out. And otherwise, it's relying on the meter staff to
Yeah,
fight the tires and check every hour and see if they're still there and what have you,
yeah.
which is an awkward system for sure. I'm a little curious about, I guess, the complaint that we've heard, and I don't know if we can do anything about it in the private parking lots where an incredible excessive fee is charged if you miss the deadline by just a minute or two. We've had complaints in our office about, I had to pay $80 and I was just 1 minute late, that sort of nonsense. And I don't know if we have any ability to require at least signage or something that would warn the customers that this is a private parking lot and requires certain conditions to be met, or else you're going to be penalized for it. I don't want to be branded, I don't want the city to be branded as, because we're dealing with two different standards here within the city parking system.
Councilmember Larson, so we've dealt with that issue several times. I'm usually the one that gets to respond to the angry letters that come to you guys in the mayor's office on those. When we have looked at this with the attorney's office, the question has come up before, can the city regulate what a private parking lot owner charges for parking? And the answer to that is no. What we can regulate is that signage be placed in a conspicuous location, letting those folks going into that lot know that it's a private parking lot. And when this came up probably over a year, probably 2 years ago, and we looked into it, we went and looked at those lots, and each one of those lots had the signage that basically met what we could require of them. So there really wasn't a lot we could do on our end. I think you're correct in identifying generally the anger I see in those emails is really from the way that the bill comes to the customer and says, pay us within 2 weeks, $45, or it goes up to $85. That's where a lot of the real anger comes from on that.
Yeah, and I'll expand just a little more about, so you mentioned the $80. So an aspect of this whole thing is we can set how much our tickets would be. Currently, we range around $15 per violation, so we're nowhere near the $45 to $85. I think as the city, we don't want to be in that $85 range, because that's when we do spend staff time with the angry citizens and really, an $85 ticket is a good amount of money. Just for missing a sign, $15, in my opinion, is much more reasonable. So that's another thing. We have the ability to keep it as a reasonable rate.
We still have to monitor it. We still have enforcement issues. How is the pay station system working out and where it's been applied? How many spaces are we covering now with the pay stations?
Yes, so we have 13 pay stations currently, with a 14th one installed but not operational at the moment in the Forsyth County Municipal Lot. So we have, and you'll notice they kind of range from right outside City Hall and Bryce Stewart, and they go up to about 4th Street. And then so they're operational right now. They work well. The big thing with those is we have citizens who aren't aware of the pay station. They might not see them. They park. They think, oh, I don't have to pay at the pay station. And it's just kind of a visibility thing. We have signs out there. It's just a lot of times some people just might overlook them.
We have parts of the city that require no pay at all. That are 1 hour parking free, which I think then confuses people about whether they have to pay and not pay. It's just we have three systems really, that no pay at all, and then we got the pay stations and we got the meters.
It's part of what we're trying to fix.
Yeah, so this kind of gets us all on the same page here. It gives us one platform to operate under. Essentially, we're more than likely, I'm not going to say certainly, moving away from parking meters, pay stations, and going to some sort of signage and enforcement to where our enforcement officers are equipped and will get a notification whenever somebody is violating. There will be a system that will tell our enforcement staff or our parking staff when somebody pays. So instead of having meters, pay stations, 1 hour parking, and then Well, that's all of our options on street. And then off street, we have the gate arms. It kind of makes it all one path with the signage and that kind of option. So really, it cleans up a lot of things. The 1 hour zones where there's no meter, no pay station, it's on our enforcement, and that's when they ride by with the stick of chalk and mark it on the tire. And that requires them to come back within an hour. And many times with our staff the way it is, it takes them a little bit longer than an hour to get back, and that person will move within that time.
Okay.
Good, thank you very much.
Councilmember Burke, do you have any questions?
Unmute.
You're muted right now. There we go.
Yes, I do have a couple of questions. First of all, thank you for this presentation. My first question, did I hear you state that the city would be responsible for the cost of the equipment and the software?
So that is to be determined. It's in my estimation that the city will not be responsible for a ton of the cost. So the software and the equipment, there might be a fee up front to kind of get the program started and get them kind of in the door. But then they'll take a per transaction cost. And so if we get however many transactions a day, and then they'll take a fee, and then that's kind of how they'll make their money off the system, and we'll also be making our money off of each transaction. So it's, I guess, a cost share way of working.
Is it any way that you could provide for council some idea as far as what the cost might be for the city?
We can do our best. That one, it might be a little difficult, but we will do our best.
I think before we agree to something, we need to know what we are agreeing to as far as the equipment and software cost. And then I wanted to also ask if we could get that cost estimation broken down based on street parking versus off-street parking, so that we'll have an idea. I know that we have, you said 2,500 spaces off-street, is that correct?
2,500 spaces in total, combined between all facilities.
Yeah, I think we need a little more information. Thank you.
And Councilmember Burke, that's fair. We wanted to bring an information item. We've been kind of ramping up our efforts to get moving on this initiative, and so this was really kind of an opportunity for staff to kind of daylight this with the Public Works Committee. So I think the feedback we've received today is helpful as we continue to move forward. But this is kind of the first discussion on this, so you've given us some good things to take a look at as we move forward and work towards getting an RFP on the streets.
Any agreements that we make with a vendor will be done first by a committee and then by full council. So costs and what technology we're using, all that will be subject to what is presented to us from vendors. We'll have multiple options, and then it'll be our choice to make as to which way we want to go. Councilmember Scipio.
Yes, usually with technology comes an impact on staff. Currently, how many people are working in our parking area? And what are we perceiving that number of staff people to be as we move forward in more technology-oriented parking?
Great question. So we have 3 enforcement officers, 2 currently. With a third one on board, we can pretty much cover the majority of downtown. Like I said, we have 3 different modes of kind of ways to park on street with the pay stations, the meters, and then that timed area. So they spend a lot of time riding around and monitoring the 3 different places. I think you'll see efficiency rise with one mode here with that updated software that they'll get an alert and say, okay, somebody parked in this block, they've been there, they paid 2 hours ago, let me ride over there and see if they're still there. If they are and they've paid, great. If they are and they haven't paid, that's when they get a parking violation. So I think that with the 3, you will see the efficiency rise. In terms of parking attendance, we have one in each attendant booth, 4 attendants. And then we provide security in our parking deck structures. And then we have a maintenance person and then a parking control supervisor. So that adds up to 8 or 9, 10 maybe.
How about the maintenance of those little vehicles that they're parking enforcement? Do we have a crew maintaining those, or is that through the fleet services? So how does that happen?
It's their, the maintenance is done through fleet.
Through fleet, okay.
And we have 3 of those vehicles, as well as 2, I guess, regular size city cars, Ford Focuses, I think they are.
So when you're talking about a change in how we're doing parking, are we looking at maintaining the same size staff, or do we anticipate a reduction at all in the number of people working in parking?
I think that's part of what we're also looking at too, Councilmember Scipio. I don't think we really know the answer to that question until we get into this and get a full understanding of what our successful vendor can offer to us in terms of technology and what we can roll out. But we've at least had some conversations in earnest about what that might look like. At this point, I don't know that we can speak intelligently on that, but we've at least got that issue on the table to look at.
That was one of the first questions raised. Being how we're understaffed, we can probably find an internal place for people to work if there is reductions, but I think we're just not ready to answer that yet, but that's very much on the minds of staff.
Yeah, I don't want to raise unnecessarily any alarm bells with our parking enforcement staff who may be watching this meeting. So that is something we take serious and we've got to look at very carefully as we move forward through this.
And are we also looking at replacing vehicles for parking? What we have now, is it old, like a lot of our fleet?
Probably.
So I can tell you that one of the enforcement vehicles was replaced about 2 years ago, and then the other ones are about 6 years old. I'll be honest, I'm not super up to date on how old they are. And then the 2 Fords that we have are they're not on the newer side, but I wouldn't exactly call them super old either.
Thank you.
Reed, thank you. I know you and your staff have been working really hard on this, and we've had some thoughtful conversations. It sounds like we're going to continue to have thoughtful conversations. It is something that I can pretty much guarantee not 100% of the public is going to be happy about when we do roll it out. So the more things we can anticipate up front that are potential questions and problems, the better off we are. I am particularly sensitive to call it accusations that downtown gets over-subsidized by the general public. This is an area that I would agree with people on. People in the suburbs are paying for people to park downtown, whether they know it or not. I think the last number I remember from a budget was about $700,000 that we're in the red every year on parking. So those are people who don't use parking spaces downtown who are paying for parking spaces downtown. I do think that needs to be rectified. Having people who actually use the spaces pay for them is the way we need to go. One of the other big topics of discussion as we've been starting to go down this path is that how do we make accommodations for employees, for special groups. The nice thing about the technology is those are things we can flip switches on. We don't have to go out and physically change things, but we can make accommodations for, some of the conversations have been about offering special fees to employers to hand out to their employees. There are multiple options. This is not happening in a vacuum. This is happening, we're learning the lessons that other communities have learned 10, 15 years ago. We're catching up. So there's lots of information on the ground, lots of things to follow. We're going to go from a 1950s technology of putting a quarter in a meter to, theoretically, I don't know that we'll go this way, but you could have a car drive down the street and photo every license plate and figure out whether it's been there for more than an hour or not, send a signal to the police department, and then they could issue tickets that way. I don't think we're going away, but the technology has evolved very, very far. We are way low on the list. One thing that I think we've talked about this before, but in terms of payment options, I would love to see an option that allows people to use a debit card. Not everybody has a smartphone. I know most people do, but in some instances, that is not possible. There's tons of literature on parking. Free parking is not free. There are communities that use their parking policy as a method to write tickets and collect fees. That is not where we're going. Our goal is to allocate parking most efficiently to the people who use it most and are most willing to pay for it. Customers who want to shop at a particular retail location should have the first shot at parking in front of a store. Right now, that's not the case. You can sit there and linger and be there all day. So it's more fair to the employers and to their customers to modernize this. The intent, again, is not to write tickets, but to efficiently allocate those parking spaces. Okay, we're a little bit ways along in this process, but we have lots of time for discussion. My deadline is December 2nd, 2024, my last meeting. So I would really like to have this in place before I leave office. And so far, I think we're operating at a good clip. So thank you very much.
Of course.
Yes, John.
A little sidebar on this deals with the parking deck and differentials between parking in the parking deck and parking on the street. Whether or not you've given any thought to, one, the condition of our parking decks, maybe this is more to the facilities people, and whether we should be forecasting some major renovations and upgrade to those to drive people into those parking lots. And then what, if we look at the parking fee structure, whether we're going to differentiate between the parking decks and the on-street parking.
Yeah, so for the condition of the parking deck, I would lean more towards the facility side, since they are a city facility with that department. In terms of the different fee structures, it's really hard to say right now. I'd like to think that we could maybe, if we want to go to $1, have it $1 citywide. Citizens, that cuts down on confusion, and it's the same across the board. But that's something that the more we talk about this, the more we discuss it, we're open to having those conversations for the best thing that fits our city.
Being able to dynamically change pricing allows us to drive traffic to the parking decks, which right now are very underutilized. So if we create a difference in pricing, more people will choose to park in the deck versus on the street. So yes, we have thought about that, talked about that, and is used in many places to increase the utility and the amount of capital that you return on your parking decks. In the last, I'm going to say 4 or 5 years, Ben, we've spent some money on our parking decks, haven't we? 6 Trade Cherry fairly recently.
That's correct, Councilmember McIntosh, as well as 4th and Church, but particularly 6 Cherry Trade. And our Property and Facilities Management Department oversees those projects.
Yeah. And it is significantly improved. Some people are never going to park in a deck, but if we can drive more traffic there, then it helps everybody out.
Yes, sir.
All right. Anything else? Reed, thank you very much. Again, good work.
Thank y'all.
G2, please.
Item G2, information on excavation permits and fiber installation in Winston-Salem.
Oh, boy, this is a fun one.
All right, Chairman McIntosh, members of the committee, I am Charles Hendrick. I work in the engineering division. Just to give you a little information about excavation permits in the city, I kind of help manage that process. So why is Winston-Salem seeing a surge in the installation of fiber optic cable, and why is council members receiving a surge of emails?
Maybe move a little closer to the mic. Yeah.
Receiving a surge in emails. Broadband expansion is happening throughout the city, but it's not just Winston-Salem, it's other municipalities around the state, around the nation. But however, broadband expansion, kind of what drove this is COVID. So when COVID hit, it kind of changed the way many of us operate. Some of it was temporary, some of it was permanent. Whether we were working from home or online schooling or virtual meetings, all those things kind of help to highlight a lack of access to high-speed broadband and internet service to small businesses, to the homes, to kind of help facilitate this. Those old copper and coax cables could not meet the demand. So in 2021, an infrastructure bill approved by Congress allocated $65 billion over a 10-year period to kind of help facilitate the expansion of broadband service throughout the nation. With that, North Carolina also has several programs where they help to meet the underserved and unserved communities. City Code 74-143. So the city for years has been reviewing what we call excavation permits. This is a requirement for any work done within the city limits, whether it's a city-maintained street or whether it's a street maintained by NCDOT. Part of that is because the city has water and sewer infrastructure within those streets, such as Solace Creek Parkway. We also have projects going on, pedestrian improvement projects, sidewalk. So the city already had that in place, but with this funding, the state of North Carolina and other municipalities, even up to the federal level, started enacting legislation to kind of help speed up the process. Those companies have lobbied hard to help speed up the process, and part of that may be due to some of the obligations or requirements of receiving those grants. There may be a sunset period on it, so that's kind of help speed them up. With this legislation, there are some shalls in there. And the big thing is a city shall review and approve or deny a permit within 30 days after it's been submitted. If a city fails to act upon that, it's going to be deemed approved by default. So once those applications have been submitted, the city does have the opportunity to set some requirements, some of what those plans need to look like, and at least give us a little bit of time to review the plans, to make comments. A city may deny an application, but if we do, we shall tell the company why it's being denied and give them an opportunity to make an improvement or to modify their plans. Once they've submitted, the city is back on a timer that we have 10 days to review or deny that application. Again, the city has certain requirements that we want to see on those plans, and after they get approved, the applicant is issued a permit and they're ready to start work. Part of this legislation also does require an applicant to promptly repair any damage that's caused by the applicant or their agent, so either the contractor or the sub. And the city can't impose any additional requirements. Just to kind of give you an idea of what we've been looking at since 2018. So from 2018 to 2021, we were receiving on average 47 permits, and we were approving those 47 permits with roughly 25 miles of fiber being approved. 2022, that number started to jump, going up to 125 permits approved and 70 miles of fiber being installed within the city limits. 2023, that's changed. So you can kind of see that the miles has significantly gone up. It's quadrupled over the previous year. So as of October 31st, we had 191 permits, and we had approved 279 miles of fiber installation. One of the differences that, to kind of help explain a little bit of this is previously those were point of sales. So if a business needed fiber optic to help support their business, their work, they would contract with AT&T, MCI, some of these companies to provide the fiber installation. That kind of changed once the money started flowing at the federal and at state level. So now we're seeing companies going in, and it's not a point of sale to a business, but it's going into neighborhoods. And that's really, it's a volume here as to why you're seeing more of this work. Just to give you a little bit of some pictures as to what this equipment looks like, that's a directional boring drill. You may have seen some of this work downtown, but to do this work, they're having to remove sidewalk panels. Of course, the contractor is required to go back in and replace that to make repairs. There's another type called a missile bore or a thumper. So that's kind of like a jackhammer, but it's a pneumatic hammer that just thumps through the ground to create a hole so you can pull the conduit and the fiber through. And then this is another piece of equipment. It's more like a plow that you pull behind, and they can install fiber that way, but that's not conducive to work in developments that has, existing water sewer connections, drainage, that could not work there. Really, the concerns that we're receiving from citizens is equipment leaving ruts in their yards, mud and dirt on streets, driveways. We have seen that there has been damage to water and sewer connections. Private utilities have been hit, whether it's Duke Energy, whether it's Comcast, Spectrum, any of those. A big concern is that the landscaping and repairing of disturbed areas in a timely manner. Part of this process is a multi-phase process. They go in, they're doing the work to install the conduit, the carrier pipe first. Then they're coming back with some different equipment, and they're pulling the fiber through. So some of the comments, again, from what we've seen from some of our citizens is, I see the equipment leaving. Why are they not in my yard seeding and strawing, repairing the ditches, getting everything straightened back up? And the reason is they've got another crew coming behind them that's going to be, and again, parked in the grass areas, and they're going to be pulling the fiber through. The other concern is the difference, trying to explain the difference with citizens between right-of-way, utility easements, and their private property. Those are kind of the concerns that we're seeing, and we're trying to answer those. Most of the companies we've talked to have, been responsive to go back and repair things, but again, some of these things aren't getting done exactly when citizens are expecting it to happen. I know I've kind of rushed through this. But if there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer those, if I can.
All right. Anybody besides Councilmember Scipio? Oh, no, Councilmember Scipio, got a question? You're always first in line.
Thank you. Very interesting, because we always learn something when you present some information to us, and I love that. You mentioned about some of the complaints is the damage to yards, et cetera, like that, the nuisance part of doing these things. Do we reimburse residents for damage to their landscaping because of what we're doing?
Now this work is not being done by the city. This is a private, would the state classifies as a public utility company. So they are responsible for any damages that may be done to the landscaping. We have had an instance where it was a yard or a connection. Those kind of things are taken care of by the utility contractor. Now, I will say that there have been some connections, water connections that have been hit, that once city county utilities, once the utilities field operation group gets a call that I'm out of water, there's water line leaking, they're going to respond to it immediately. We are going through risk management and to seek reimbursement for work that we've done. But to answer your question, that the landscaping part is handled by the utility contractor.
Well, let me ask you this. Are the utility contractors being contracted by us to do the work?
No, ma'am.
This is not that. Okay.
This is all private.
This is work that is being done because of what entity then?
Councilor Scipio, I think it goes back to some of the slides Charles showed you earlier, kind of that market demand and kind of some increased funding that's kind of pushed the desire to get some of this infrastructure out. So this is no service that the city of Winston-Salem has requested. This is purely market driven.
Then as the city, are we engaged with, do they come and ask us, or this is just information about what's going on, what we're seeing around in the community, but we really don't have any voice in it?
So, go ahead,
I was
Charles.
just going to say, our voice in this is limited in the sense that they're submitting plans. They're allowing us to review the plans and make sure, one, that, from an engineering perspective, from what we see, that we're protecting the public health, that they're not trying to install something out in the roadway or something that may interfere with vehicular traffic, pedestrian traffic. We're also looking at it to make sure that we're trying to protect our infrastructure, water, sewer, drainage, anything like that.
So I think I'm clear now. This is for any kinds of excavation that goes on in the city, for whether it's fiber optics or internet that comes from some of those companies that, why it's happening.
Yes, ma'am.
And so it's to know why it's happening, for us to know that it's happening. But we really don't have much to do with it other than reviewing plans.
Yeah, Councilmember Scipio, so we've been reviewing excavation permits for many years. What has kind of brought this issue to the forefront is exactly what Charles mentioned, is that increase in the number of permits and the mileage that has gone up of the fiber that's going in. And now we as staff, and probably you as elected officials, are starting to receive complaints from folks who had a really nice yard and it gets ripped up and it gets put back not the way it was before, and some of those just inconveniences that go along with this work. So we wanted to bring this and at least just daylight this issue to the Public Works Committee.
This first came to my attention when I was serving on the North Carolina League of Municipalities Board. The subject has been around for a while. As it started to bubble up and as the legislature started to talk about it, the league jumped in and said, hey, what do the municipalities have as far as, rights in this scenario? Everybody wanted to have fiber in the ground all at once, and it has kind of limped along. And now recently is the time where you're seeing just the amount of the scale of it go, which is why we're getting many more calls. But the legislature said, okay, there are 600 municipalities in the state of North Carolina. We can't have 600 different sets of regulations because it's not going to get in the ground that way. So they came and said, we're going to streamline it, and y'all are going to have as much power as we tell you can have, which is very little. We've had plans come to us on the back of napkins. We've had folks that were almost amateurish in the way that they were putting stuff in the ground. We've had gas lines cut in the West End. It's been a contentious relationship all along. And the frustrating thing for citizens and for us is that our ability to hold contractors to quality work is very limited. So we scream as loud as we can. There are a couple of contractors out there right now that seem to be fairly responsive, which is really good. They don't have to be, but they seem like they're acting in good faith. So that's the reason why we're having this today, is to sort of explain why we have as little power to hold these people accountable as we do. Councilmember Larson.
Yeah, this stuff's going in underground along with all kinds of other things that are underground. We really don't have any say on how many vendors are out there putting pipes underground, do we?
No, sir, we don't. By law, as a communication, if it's a public utility, they can go in and they have a right to be in the public right of way, just like our water, sewer.
We can have multiple 5G, whatever.
Right.
Companies laying in pipe.
We do. There's probably, right now, there's approximately a dozen companies that we have plans either recently reviewed or in the process of reviewing right now, working for different companies. And they're all looking at doing the same thing, getting that fiber in.
The good part might be that it's going underground instead of on telephone poles.
Yes, sir.
That's a good thing.
I don't see Councilmember Burke. Councilmember Burke, if you're still there, do you have any questions?
I do not. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Charles, thank you for the report. Appreciate the update, and keep us informed if anything changes. Thank you. All right. G3.
Item G3, update on capital projects and street resurfacing.
Fan favorite, Mr. Huff.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee and council. Keith Huff with Field Operations. Here to tag team with you with Mr. Tesh back here on an update on our street resurfacing program and capital projects. So as you'll probably recall, Mr. Fansler last month briefed the committee on private streets and the requests that we have received on private streets. This is kind of going on the public right-of-way side, and We're going to give you an overview of the city street maintenance program, how the street pavement rating process works, how that resurfacing list is developed, the process, the steps of that. Mr. Tesh is going to come up and give you a briefing on the program funding for this activity and some options with the motor vehicle privilege tax. Then we're going to go into some innovative practices. Just being back from the School of Government asphalt benchmarking, we're loaded with some new knowledge and information, wanting to share that. And then talk about our current staffing levels for in-house crews that maintain these streets. And then we'll shift gears and go to some general project updates on field operations projects as they're ongoing. So in general, the city currently maintains approximately 1,200 miles of hard surface streets and about 6 3/4 miles of gravel and dirt streets. So there's 3 main types of streets within our community. You've got hot mix asphalt. That is the asphalt that comes pre-mixed from the plant and is, historically speaking, the more sound because it's composed of computer-controlled aggregate, rock, etc. As you'll recall, asphalt is stone and oil, basically, mixed together in proper portions, cures out. That's what we're riding on typical streets. Bituminous surface treatment, also known as chip seal. That is an older school method where you're taking layers of oil or emulsion and then mixing them in with different gradations of stone. Less controlled, an older school technique, as I mentioned. And then you have your dirt gravel streets there. So to preserve these streets, we basically undertake a couple practices, and to back up, every street weathers and breaks down at a certain rate, and it's a function of how many traffic counts it has on it, what's the weight of those traffic counts. Is it industrial truck traffic like one would see on Lowry Street, or is it residential in nature? But every street has a degradation rate, and we'll get into that a little bit further in the slides. But how we in-house try to maintain these streets, or preserve them, if you will, is pothole repair, crack sealing, base repair activities with our in-house crews. And when those preservation methods no longer take hold and the ride quality for the street has become intolerable, then the street's got to be basically milled up and totally restored. So this is a chart that kind of tracks the pavement condition as it progresses over the years. And depending on those functions, those independent variables that we talked about as far as traffic counts, weight, weather, how much salt we put on it, that street's going to decline. But we as a community can preserve the integrity of those streets by incorporating those preservation methods, i.e. the pothole repair, the crack seal, the base repair techniques to preserve those streets to have a longer lifespan. So getting into the rating, how we attack resurfacing in general, we're looking at doing the streets that are worst. Worst is first philosophy is what we've always kind of attacked them by, where 100 is a perfectly brand new hot mix street. And 0 being, you know, you'd need a tank to go across it. It is broken up, it is defunct. And the pavement condition index is a series of variables that NCDOT uses and passes on to local governments, and they can be manipulated in various ways. But what it does in general is takes the stressors of the street, whether it be block cracking, alligator cracking, transverse cracking, bleeding, rutting, all of those distressors, quote unquote, and it packages them up into a nice, neat number. And then, as you can see, as you go to the further right of the slide, you can have a very granular rating scale, like you see with the first one, or you can have a broader rating scale. The City of Winston uses a broader rating scale than, say, NCDOT Division 9, and that's just for ease of use when we start rating these things. Here's the way that, unfortunately, we have done this historically by in-house staff, physically going out to the street with a measuring wheel, ruler, level, and looking at this. Due to staffing issues, it's been years since some of our streets have been rated. So we have a disparity, if you will, on rated versus non-rated. And it comes into play when we compose this annual list for the council to review and approve. So cost-wise, draw your attention to the green bars where on average across the North Carolina preservation.
Did we skip a slide there?
I'm sorry, we've got one out of sequence here.
Okay.
So you'll see the next one. Just flip-flopped them for continuity. So you'll see that preservation on average across the state is $10,000 per mile treated here. And then if you go straight up to a resurfacing that has no base repair, no milling, no profile milling, then you're talking about $107 or $107,000, I should say, per lane mile.
Per mile?
Per mile. And this will tie together when Mr. Tesh explains the funding that goes into this and how far that contract can go given these lane mile costs. So rehabilitation, that's where you're doing base repair, you're milling the road, and then you're filling it with hot mix asphalt. On average, you're talking about $148,000 per lane mile on that. So very expensive proposition right here. So when we compose this list, every year there's a new list. When the resurfacing effort stops, we've already started composing the next list. So again, worst is first, based on current pavement index, work order requests that we've received, and then council member and citizens complaints. If you're getting that, we're putting it in the queue for review and consideration. Then we go out because of the lack of a current PCI, we're field verifying those segments to be included. And once we get a rudimentary level draft list, we're sending it out to other city departments. So if engineering has a project that they're doing, planning knows of a development coming along, we don't want to have those conflict elements with our list that we have to backtrack, or they're coming right behind us with a new development and traffic counts are going to destroy the integrity of our street. So trying to whittle that down so we've got a good clean list. Then comes one-on-one meetings with the council members to review the selected streets in their ward, and we're going to try to stick to that worst is first, but again, as Mr. King says, you might have some coaches picks in the consideration there. So then the list, once it's approved, is then sent to the purchasing department for formal procurement. Council then gets a action to approve a contract with that contractor or vendor, and then resurfacing is conducted in the warm months of the year, April through November. So that's our resurfacing season.
And Keith, can you talk about why that time frame is important, why it's April through November?
Yes, so in the warm months, to apply asphalt at an optimal index, if it gets too cold, then that asphalt is going to start clumping. You want it between 270, 300 when it's applied. That means it's uniform, it's pliable, and then it doesn't cure out or get hard on you quicker. Like if you were doing this in February, you would have to be very quick about it, and then the quality of the asphalt application comes into play. So
Plants typically shut down during those months as well.
Plants do shut down for maintenance in the colder weather months, and they rehab their plants and maintain them as well. So yeah, absolutely, excellent question. All right, so Mr. Tesh is going to talk with you about the historic funding for research.
Thank you, Keith. Good afternoon, Chairman McIntosh and members of the committee and council. Keith had worked with budget staff to pull this together. We've got a couple of slides to talk about motor vehicle privilege tax as well, which we discussed during budget season and intend to bring back to you as part of the FY25 budget discussions as well. But we have a history here of street resurfacing funding. I will note that the 2 years at the end are planned, so those are from the capital improvement plan. We're not that far along yet. But what it shows you is that there have been 3 cycles where we've used debt financings or larger debt financings in terms of referendums and then limited obligation bonds to the tune of $4.5 million. But in the other years, when we're using our 2/3 capacity or just using the Powell bill funding that we have, there are smaller amounts. If my math is correct, if you add all of those up, they add up to about $60 million. Divide that out, and it's a little less than $5 million per year. which gets you at $125,000 a mile on average, just under 40 miles of street resurfacing done in a year. Keith showed you 1,200 miles of city streets. That's centerline miles, not lane miles. There are nearly 3,000 lane miles of city streets. So getting 39 miles done out of almost 3,000 in a year does not give you a great percentage. So the reason that we see some of our city streets in the condition that they're in is that over time, there hasn't been funding allocated sufficient to keep up with the demand and the increasing cost. As Keith has come to you several times and told you, the cost to do this has increased significantly, as many other things have with inflation here in recent years. Did want to keep in mind when we talk about the resident survey, city streets, I'll draw your attention down to the bottom of that little red arrow, are habitually at the bottom of services in terms of the perception of them being provided. And you can see over the course of at least 4 years there, the trend has been downward. The trend has been generally downward with most services, which sometimes is reflective of conditions outside of the city's control. But city street maintenance, resurfacing particularly, is always at the bottom of the list of things that our residents are happiest about.
Are not happiest about.
Yeah, or the thing with which they have, they are least happy about. Yes, ma'am. So we said as part of the budget discussion, we would come back and talk about opportunities for increased revenue sources. Several years ago, I want to say probably 5 or 7 years ago, the state provided general statute authority to all cities to enact up to $30 for a motor vehicle privilege tax. What you see at the top there, we currently act under a local act that allows us to go up to $20, and we've only done 15 of that. There are some differences in the local act and what the general statute authority provides for, and I've got a slide on that. But generally, we could use the vast majority of that additional $15 in motor vehicle privilege authority for street resurfacing. Again, there are some things in the local act where we send money to our transit fund as well as fund things like sidewalks, greenways, traffic calming and such that are required per the local act. If we went to general authority, we wouldn't have to do that anymore. But the idea here is if we were to enact that, you would have a majority of that funding potentially going to street resurfacing. How much is that? Going from $15 to $30 is roughly $2.8 million a year. So if you look back at that chart, in some of those years, we were under $3 million. So in some of those years, you would be more than doubling the amount that we would put into street resurfacing annually. There are a couple of policy choices. We want to put those out here for council to look at, and then again, come back as part of the budget package in February through June during those discussions and talk to you. Funding would be predominantly for resurfacing, as we've said. There is an opportunity to use some of the additional MVPT authority for transit operations. $5 of the 30 per the statute is allowed for that, so there is some opportunity to generate additional funding for the transit operation, which may be in need. And as I discussed, number 3 there, with the local act, we currently fund a couple of things that if we went to $30, we wouldn't technically have to. That doesn't mean that the council would have to change that, but you could look at administering different priorities in the short term and then changing that funding later. So this is just an opportunity. There were several council members who asked specifically about this in the CARF for the budget. We said that we would come back in the fall and discuss this, and so we're putting it on your radar as an opportunity, and then generally we would bring this back with additional funding or additional information as part of the budget process. I think that's all I've got for you. Do you have any questions on that part of it before we jump back to Keith's presentation?
Is the thought that that motor vehicle privilege tax would be collected at the time when people re-register their car every year?
The motor vehicle privilege tax is already collected that way.
That's what, okay.
Councilor Larson.
Right now, I read somewhere where we have a cap of $20.
The current cap is $20 per the local act. We are currently only charging $15.
Charging 15, and what would it take to go to 30 legally?
What would it take to go to 30?
Do we have to go back to the legislature for that, or what?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Do we have to go back to the legislature to go to 30, or can we do that within our own jurisdiction?
We can go up to 30, so if we go back, The general statute authority will let us go up to 30, but the money has to be used a little bit differently than under our local act.
Right.
We are
Councilmember
suggesting this would be used predominantly for street resurfacing because under the general statute authority, it has to be used predominantly for street resurfacing and maintenance activities.
Do we see a time that we'll actually get caught up?
Will we see a time when we'll actually get caught up on street resurfacing at the
See
current level?
multiple heads in the audience.
At the current level of funding, no, and not with this either. This would be a small step in the right direction.
Councilmember Burke, did you have any questions at this point?
I do not. Thank you.
Okay. Scott, thank you very much.
I just have one point of clarification. The local act and the general authority, it's still just one tax. It's not two separate ones.
It's the same thing.
But it's how we choose to, which one we want to operate under.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
So on the maintenance side of this, we take the number that budget provides, and then we back into a contract based on that dollar figure value. Like we talked about before, there's ways that we can prepare for whatever budget amount we should get, whether it's $4 million or $10 million. And one thing that we have seen in the asphalt benchmarking program in the School of Government, that other municipalities are utilizing a lot of technology, AI, if you will, to rate their streets to get one consolidated pavement condition index. And it's via a camera truck or a laser truck. And a lot of conversation ensued in Chapel Hill on this very item because even communities like the town of Wake Forest, Apex, are using AI to get a more trued up consolidated pavement condition index to rate their streets, get a holistic deliverable that they can give their elected bodies for updated decision making. So what we are proposing is basically we send out a request for proposals for this work. Again, there's a number of different vendors that provide laser truck versus camera. So pursue a request for proposals, get an updated PCI for all of our roads in the city, and that way we can give the elected body a trued up index of where we are and where we need to go. So that's some innovative practices that we can prepare and we can undertake no matter what the budget number is moving forward to optimize our efforts. Moving on to staffing right quick. As we talked about earlier, the folks that carry out your day-to-day maintenance activities are your streets crews, your concrete crews, drainage crews. And one point we want to make in this presentation is these crews, we are still depleted in positions. Don't want you to look at the org chart as far as function, but look at the red there. That denotes a vacant position. And that org chart has changed since the time that I composed this presentation. So it's constantly changing. Some work groups have a 50% vacancy right now as we speak. We are working to hire new staff, but most of our new hires have come to us at the maintenance worker level or the entry level position. So your skilled folks are leaving. They're still plan retirements for these groups in December, but we're trying to bolster our efforts here on the maintenance side. We have folks that are undergoing our new CDL training, trying to get more skills and help the effort as we move forward, but it's a heavy lift right now. So just wanted to let the committee know where we stand on this as we speak and carry out this presentation.
Keith, I had a question for you on that one, excuse me. Mayor Pro Tem asked whether there are any possibilities of working with any feeder programs from any of our local universities for Site Tech, Winston-Salem State, to either to look at some of the evaluation, the roadway evaluations, or to fill some of these spots. You know, can we hook people early and bring them in?
Great question. We looked at, for Site Tech, to partner with them, skills, training, At this point, nothing's transpired on the training of the positions. With Human Resources implementing the CDL program for SciTech was a player in that originally. That pivoted slightly as far as the end product, but we do have a CDL training program. That's kind of the gateway for these folks. That's the cornerstone with field crews as far as their training efforts and being able to drive that heavy equipment and get it to and from the workplace.
Thank you. Councilmember Scipio.
Yep, thank you. So clarification, all of those red boxes are vacant at this time?
Yes, ma'am. Roger that.
And yet, there also, if we had to put some pink on there, the people who are about to retire
Yes.
in the white spaces, how many more would that be?
We have roughly 4 to 5 skilled positions that could retire in December. Some have formally filed their paperwork. Others are contemplating.
These at the bottom are the people who are actually out doing it. They're not the brain trusts like the engineers, et
Correct.
cetera.
These are your frontline
These are your
staff. As you go from the bottom to the top, the bottom is your maintenance workers, your entry-level positions. And as you migrate up, it's light equipment operators, medium equipment operators, heavy equipment operators, senior crew coordinators, then supervisors.
How long has this condition existed with this kind? Because I know we've had vacancies.
Yeah.
I just need to know about how,
Pandemic,
since the pandemic. So this is a lot due to what has transpired over the fact that COVID came.
Yes, ma'am.
And people didn't come back.
exactly. And the job market for this particular skill set is not the best that we've ever seen right now.
Yeah.
So when you see these guys,
Yeah.
thank them for what they're doing.
Well, we've got to figure out how do we fill these vacancies, because if we don't have the staff, either we're going to contract that out, which is hard, or we're going to be even worse condition because we can't, if we had the money, we don't have the bodies to get the work done.
So Councilmember Scipio, if I could just for a minute, I think that's why Keith and I talked a little bit about this, and I think it was so important for us to bring this information to you. And this slide really ties a lot of what Keith has shared with you together. Our citizens tell us the street condition is the #1 issue for them. As Scott has told you, we've got limited dollars that we can put towards it. Our data that helps us tee this thing up is not the most accurate. So as we go into it for the current resurfacing contract, our data is not the greatest. Moving forward, hopefully we will have contracted with somebody who has given us that updated data to better inform our decisions. But I think for the next contract we put out, it's so important that we continue to focus on the worst is first mentality. I know we've done different variations of that in the past, but the reason that is so important this time around is because of this slide that you're looking at right now. And when you've got residents who live on streets who are in the 20s and 30s and 40s whose streets really need a lot of repair work, when we don't add those to the resurfacing contract, we don't have, as you can see on this diagram, we don't have the staff to go out and handle those. So it's really, really important that we hammer away and go from the worst is first mentality because of exactly what you're seeing on your screen right there. Those staff resources are very, very limited, and when we're not taking care of those streets that are in really poor condition, as Keith stated, they degrade much faster and they require much more staff, maintenance on those, and we don't have the staff. We're digging the hole even deeper on the maintenance side. So this slide really kind of ties all of that together, and it really, I hope, will help shape some of our discussions for our next resurfacing contract.
Yeah, I think that's important too, because I'm looking at this, you got vacancies at the top of your staffing needs, so you wouldn't have people who can train on site and supervise for excellence on site with these kinds of gaps. So I think that's very critical. Mr. City Manager, you have a lot to do. Thank you.
Well, excellent summation statement, Mr. King. That was it for that. That was my conclusion on this particular segment. So with that, if there's any other questions on the resurfacing funding aspect before we jump into CIP updates, more than happy to entertain them.
Councilmember Larson.
This is the first I've heard of the radar, ground penetrating, whatever, assessment tool. I think that's a great idea if it works. I don't have any idea how reliable it is. But it could save us a lot of time. It could provide some consistency. Different people see different things when they're in the field.
Right.
Absolutely. Subjectivity in the ratings when human beings do it has always been an issue.
Yes.
Always been an issue. Great
It can
point.
be done more quickly, and if it can be done consistently, I think we ought to look at that fairly quickly because, I mean, rather than putting students from Forsyth Tech out there to try to make an assessment of a road, I think it would be better to try to invest in a mechanical
Yeah.
technology.
The good thing about these trucks, like you mentioned, is they can get the data to us collectively, holistically. It's not coming piecemeal where a human being rated Carver School Road in 2019, and then the other streets in the ward are coming 3 years later after they've had more than 3 years of degradation, ice, salt, plows, traffic, et cetera.
Do you have any idea how long it would take to do a complete assessment using this technology?
That's where we're hoping in this request for proposals. That is one of the key criteria, is when they can get the information, how much does it take to update? Much like Reed's presentation, what skin does the city have in the game versus the consultant? Those things are what we're hoping to iron out in that request for proposals.
Good luck.
Councilmember Scipio.
I really love that technology too. I think that's almost essential. It takes out all biases that go into trying to determine whether a road is good or bad and whether it should be resurfaced. But I want to congratulate you and your department for the resurfacing that has happened this year. It is a pleasure to drive down Fifth Street, to go down Patterson Avenue. It is such a wonderful thing. We've been waiting so long for those roads to really be resurfaced. And it just makes a difference. It just makes a difference in the community, in the neighborhood, how we feel about where we live. And we've been struggling for so long with getting that done. So I want to thank your department and say thank you, finally, for that. And now I can invite everybody to come drive down Fifth Street in the East Ward, because it's a marvelous kind of feel to drive down a well-paved street. So thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
This is a question maybe for Scott. How do we rank versus our peers in what we charge MVPT?
Of the 5 largest cities, 3 of the others moved to the $30 per the general statute authority the year that it was available. We don't charge the 30, and Durham doesn't charge the 30. We'd have to contact Durham. They do have that transit tax as well, and I think they implemented that transit tax, not MVPT, and did some accounting on the back end to kind of make themselves whole for not doing that.
And so when people compare cities based on their tax load, this is one thing that does not show up typically because it's not in a property tax.
So when we show that chart each year during budget season, motor vehicle privilege tax is one of the things that we include in the property taxes and fees. So we would show that to you, but most people, the only time they see it, as Councilmember Scipio said, is when they are re-registering their vehicle. They pay their property taxes, and then they see that down at the bottom. And quite frankly, some people just see the bottom line and don't even know that it's there if they don't look at the line item for the registration cost as well.
So if the state money, whether it's PAL money or whatever, stays relatively constant, which we hope is the case, then our choice really is to raise property taxes or increase the MVPT.
We have some really good news on PAL bill funding coming to Councilmember Clark's committee here in a couple of minutes.
Wonderful.
The state budget included an additional $15.5 million, which should net more than $700,000 annually for us, but that is a general fund appropriation of the state. It's no longer tied to motor fuel taxes, which is probably a good thing with the way you alluded to how they're going down. But the General Assembly does get to choose each year how much PAL bill funding is available through the State Street Aid Program.
Right. So as a council, if we decide we want to raise more money from, from our sources outside the state, we've got to choose between those two, one of which the MVPT tends to be much more regressive, hurts lower income people much harder, even though it's the same amount of dollars, has a much bigger impact on lower income.
Generally, flat fees are more regressive, and we've looked at a couple of those and opted to go with property tax increases in the past instead of other flat fees. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
All right. If there's no other questions on the resurfacing component, we'll move on to some quick updates on field operations projects that probably you get calls about or questions about or whatnot. So we've kind of beat this dead horse, but annual resurfacing, this year's contract, I'm happy to say that we are in the final stages of that. I just got word in this meeting that Town Run, the asphalt is down on Town Run.
Drove on it
So
today.
the only thing that remains on this year's contract is striping on Town Run. So it was a great effort. Like Councilmember Scipio said, we attacked some pretty high-profile streets with 4th and 5th Street. You see in the slides there, milling out of 4th Street. A lot of coordination, a lot of activity, moving parts with that get that work done.
Well done on that one.
We are happy, yes. We are happy to get those segments done and move on to the next one. Old Salisbury Road, in Finance Committee, you will have an item this afternoon to award a contract to move forward to construction on that particular project. As you're aware, it's been closed for a while now, and we are anxious to get moving on that. So basically, we will hopefully get to award of a contract and start the notice to proceed process, start acquiring the materials for the box culverts and other infrastructure needs that go into play, and hopefully get to construction in the spring on that. So anxious to move forward on Old Salisbury. Lynn Haven, this is a drainage project in the West Ward. It had sinkholes in the middle of the road, leaving the road not travelable. We are now through probably 3/4 of the pipe installation of that. After the pipe has been installed, we will resurface this segment and get it open to traffic. So I know the citizens around there are anxious to get that project completed. Shifting gears, sidewalk cutting. We've had an increase, a significant increase in complaints on falling slips, trips in the central business district and all of the wards, actually. So we've initiated some significant sidewalk cutting contracts, and to this point, we've completed over 1,000 sidewalk cutting repairs and looking to do more in the future. So very aggressive, active project there. Hawthorne Road, this is replacement of the culvert near First Street and Hawthorne. It is undermining. This is a big ticket fix here considering the proximity of Atrium Health. Right now, we are currently under design, or actually we have designs complete, and we are working to acquire easements on that project. So that's a critical piece of infrastructure right there that we'll have to replace. Underwood, this was an emergency culvert repair due to the invert or the bottom of the culvert system failing. This particular project is complete, all except for some minor punch list items. It is open to traffic as we speak. Griffith Road, this one kind of came out of left field. This was an emergency project where Griffith Road opened up at the shoulder and had a very large sinkhole. We were able to stabilize the pipe, construct a new invert, and didn't have to close the road during the process. So that project is complete. Obviously, Griffith Road is, traffic's underway, and that project is done. Thabra Road has been closed since the springtime because of the failure of this arch metal pipe. Right now, the road is closed. We are under design currently and trying to proceed swiftly to get a design, permitting, and then construction hopefully in the spring of next year. Lowry Street, this is a street rehab in general. Lowry Street was constructed to residential standards due to the industrial traffic that it now conveys on a daily basis. It is in very poor condition, so this project would totally rehab the street cross-section to industrial standards. It's currently under design. Lura Road is one that recently came to us. It's failure of a 54-inch pipe. Lura is a one-way in, one-way out road, and we are currently under emergency design process for that. Fanning Drive, you see a pretty cyclic process here. The road fails, we come in, repair the pipe. Same thing with Fanning, failed 24-inch pipe. This was an emergency project as well. Fanning Road is complete and the road is open to traffic. Lineback Drive, another failed 54-inch metal pipe. This one's under design. 3rd Street is new to us. This is out the front door of the Callidium. We were alerted to a failure in the road one day, and you've got 2 inches of pavement, 8 inches of concrete, and then very soupy soil underneath. So when the Callidium project is complete, we will start undertaking investigation here to determine what to do with 3rd Street right there. So this is under investigation as we speak.
Where about on 3rd Street is that?
So if you look out the front door of the Callidium building, it's right there.
At the very front door?
Yep.
See the Porta Johns in the
Well,
back.
it can't, can Callidium open with the street in that condition?
We want to attack this problem as quick as we possibly can.
Okay.
Scheduled for February.
Yeah.
Point being is these projects are coming up
So quick.
very rapidly. So with that, entertain any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Huff. Councilmember Scipio.
Just like we have that technology that can go in and tell you the condition of the street surfaces, is there technology that can go around the city that could tell us the condition of all of these culverts before they fail?
Yeah, that usually comes in the form of a closed-circuit television camera assessment where a crew deploys to the site and they physically run a camera or other device through the culvert system. So it can be done, but we have over 25,000 pipes, culverts, and drainage system in our community. So
Yeah.
it's a heavy lift to get all of them at that degradation rate as we're talking about, because every storm, like Bethabra Road, we had some very large storm events at the first of this year, and degradation can happen very rapidly. So a heavy lift to get all of them that we have in our community.
But somehow we're reactive to those failures as
Yes, ma'am.
opposed to being proactive and anticipating them. And even though it's a heavy lift, I think we might want to investigate what could we do to move us a little ahead of the failure, because they've been, a lot of them are falling apart, and it's because our city is older. It's maturing. It has matured when it comes to that infrastructure, and it's going to happen more and more and more. And so I think it'd be better if we could figure out what's the next one that might happen and see if we can get ahead of it. And I'm not too sure what we might be able to get in federal monies from all of the infrastructure money that's been spoken about, but for both our roads, our bridges, and these culverts. I think that we should also investigate that, too.
Any other questions? Councilmember Larson.
You didn't mention my favorite bridge on Wachovia Street that you cleaned up.
Yes, sir. Wachovia Street is fixed, and
thank
it is open for travel, as you well know.
It's a 19th century bridge there, and you took good care of it. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, this is a cross-section of the greatest hits, not all of the projects by any stretch.
Councilmember Burke, any questions?
No questions. Thank you.
Keith, another great report. Scott, thank you for your work. We got our work cut out for us. So that's one thing to remember, like leaves, where we have, I think as a council agreed not to interrupt the schedule by calling in the hotshot team. Same thing with roadways. Let's go by the data, because when we take things out of order and politically nominate, push things up the list, it's inherently unfair to people whose roadway really is worse off. So let's try to keep those to a minimum if we can. All right, if nothing further, we're adjourned.